Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us for this Preserving Communities and Avoiding Displacement webinar. We will be getting started shortly. We're just having folks join the webinar right now, so we'll give it a couple of moments. Today, we've gathered community-focused experts on how best to preserve homes, reduce displacement, and improve community health. So we're really excited for this morning's conversation. Thank you all for being here today. I'll introduce our panelists in just a moment. We'll talk more about what we're going to discuss this morning. I just want to give it just another moment for everyone to get into the Zoom webinar. Just so folks know, in case you're new to Zoom webinar, you can see us, but we can't see you. You are a key part of the conversation though, even though we can't see you this morning. So if you want to go ahead and pop into the chat and let us know who you are and where you're from, we'd love to know who all is joining us this morning. And we'd love to get to your questions and make sure that the panelists have a chance to hear from our audience as well, so you all can be part of the conversation. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to join us this morning for this Preserving Communities and Avoiding Displacement webinar. We're really excited for this morning's conversation. If you're joining us, please feel free to drop your name in the chat, tell us who you're with and where you're from. Today, we've gathered community-focused experts to discuss how best to preserve homes, reduce displacement, and improve health, all in the process. My name is Serena Unrein, and I'm with the Arizona Partnership for Healthy Communities, which is managed by LISC Phoenix. We're co-hosting today's online forum with the Arizona Housing Coalition, and this morning's amazing panel will be discussing how to increase the amount of affordable housing opportunities while preserving culture and community and preventing displacement. A few housekeeping things to note before we get into the conversation shortly. You can see us, but we can't see you. Even though we can't see you, you are a key part of this conversation. So please go ahead and drop your name in the chat, tell us where you're from. And throughout this morning's conversation, please ask your questions. We'll get to as many audience questions as we can over the next 75 minutes. And we will be sure to get to any sort of comments as well that you might include in the chat. We will be recording this webinar and sending out a link to the recording to everyone who registered for this webinar. So if you're in this room, you will get a link to this recording. The follow-up email will also include links to any resources our speakers referenced during today's webinar. Let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to have each of our panelists introduce themselves so you can get to know them a little better. I'll start with you, Chris. Please share your name, what brings you to this work, and any helpful background about yourself. And please briefly tell us about your community.
Yeah, thank you. So Christopher Casillas, my family's been in Superior for over 100 years. My son, Francisco, is 6th generation Superior here. So deep community roots, and founded a nonprofit, Regenerating Sonora. We are nurturing local potential for a resilient and thriving future. And Superior is a small town, just under 3,000 people, beautiful mountain town with rich history. And we're working on diversifying our economy so we can bring more people to see all the adventures that our beautiful desert has. And we're just excited to be a part of this presentation today and this conversation we're going to have. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. Patricia, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Yes, good morning, everyone. Buenos días. Patricia Garcia Duarte here, Executive Vice President at Chicanos por la Causa, focusing on homeownership initiatives. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and a little bit about me. I'm an Arizona native. I was born in Yuma, but raised in Somerton, a very small rural community. And as I was reflecting for this webinar, I didn't realize I grew up in a segregated community, because my town of Somerton, when I grew up, was primarily just Latinos. And it wasn't until I went into high school that I saw more diversity in the community. So I am the daughter of immigrants. My parents both are from Mexico, and they immigrated in the 50s. And I'm the first in my family to attend a 4-year university, which was transformational for me. I know that I wouldn't be here had it not been for my education. But when I reflect in my career this month, October of this year, I am celebrating 36 years in community and economic development. And I have learned so much, and I keep learning. So this topic is really, really important because communities change, and the intentionality of what we want to make sure happens has to be real. And it takes a lot of people to do that. So I am looking forward to having this conversation. One last thing, homeownership for me is my passion. And my parents still live in the house that I grew up in. My dad built that house. I remember that house changing over the years. As the family grew, our house also grew. So for me, preservation, homeownership go hand in hand. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing your stories and your background. And last but not least, we have Ryan. Would you like to introduce yourself next?
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks everyone for being here and talking about housing, which right now in Arizona is probably one of the biggest forefront issues in every politico's, every organization's mind. Ryan Winkle, Executive Director with Rail CDC. We are a community development corporation that is a place-based, and I'll repeat, place-based. And we focus all of our work around low to moderate income census tracts around transit, where massive amounts of investment are happening, and really push the idea of anti-displacement and wealth building for communities through various tools and programs.
Great. Thanks so much, Ryan. Thanks to our panelists for being here today. You can all already tell just from those intros that they have just a wealth of expertise and they are deeply embedded in their communities. So I hope you'll start thinking about questions that you have about their work, their communities, and go ahead and pop those questions into the chat, and we'll get to those throughout this morning. And I'd like each of our panelists to start by answering this first question so we can just get to know a little bit more about your frame of mind around this topic of preserving communities and avoiding displacement. When you think about preservation in your community, what does preservation mean to you, and what do you think is most important to preserve? And maybe we'll go in reverse order. Ryan, why don't I go ahead and start with you?
Awesome. So preserving and preservation. All right. So when I think about Rail CDC, our kind of our large group of volunteers and people who are working with us, and community organizers and economic development folks, I think more about the idea of that sacred space of somebody's place, right? And their neighborhood. And so when I think about preserving that, Rail CDC is not a houser. We would love to be a houser one day and a nonprofit developer. But at this point, what we focus on is helping folks to attain housing, attain business ownership, and attain or at least preserve through down payment programs and credit building their space. So how do they buy their house? How do they buy their business? And how do they remain where they have their lived experience?
Thanks, Ryan. Patricia, would you like to hop in next about what preservation means to you?
Preservation to me means a lot of different things. It's allowing people to stay in their communities if that's what they want to do. It's preserving community, it's preserving culture, and across the nation, it's a very common problem that many communities have been gentrifying. Economics, I mean, there's different things that are happening, and I'm not saying it's totally wrong, but there should be a balance. It's really unfair for people who want to stay in their neighborhood and their community, but they can't afford to stay anymore. So for me, preservation is all about intentionality, making sure that there's planning, adequate planning to have that sustainability. And the mixed incomes is important, right? There's economic studies that indicate when there's a good balance of mixed incomes, they weather economic downturns much better. So the whole segregation thing is an issue. There's a lot of programs that this government has funded for affordability. I'm talking about housing. And that's, unfortunately, there's loopholes, and we'll talk more about that. So preservation is about letting the community decide what they want their community to be like.
Thank you. And we will be certain to get to those loopholes. And of course, Chris, let's hear your perspective on preservation and what it means.
Yeah, I think about preservation like maintaining the integrity of something and also maintaining the viability of something, meaning like its ability to stand on its own. And I think about what is it that we're trying to preserve. When we're taking this place-based approach, it's definitely the spirit of the place. Like each place has a vibe or has a feeling. It has a spirit to it, has a unique character. And we really want to preserve that spirit of the place, the unique character of the place. And then you can apply that on a more granular scale into a particular building or a particular part of land that all have a certain unique character and spirit to them that is what we're trying to preserve ultimately.
I love how deeply meaningful you all have shown that place can be. Ryan, you talked about the places that we live being a sacred space. Chris, you just mentioned the spirit of a place. It's clear that where we live matters deeply to us. It matters in so many different ways. So what are some of the current challenges and barriers that we're facing in Arizona to preserving communities, and what challenges have you all seen in your work? I know Patricia had mentioned loopholes, so let's talk about what's stopping us from preserving communities right now, and I'll let anyone who wants to answer go ahead and hop in.
Let me start. I mentioned earlier, I've been in this space 36 years, and there's a program that housers in the housing industry are very familiar with. It's called the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, LIHTC for short. That is funded through the government, and funding comes to every state. It's a very popular program that provides affordable rent to residents in communities. And I'm familiar with it, but I haven't been as deeply involved in the program until as of late. And I was worried. I knew the program has a 30-year commitment, right? It's a program. And I knew that there was a 15-year part where there was investors. It's a financing mechanism, right? With a low-income housing tax credit, it allows the financing to build or to acquire and rehab a apartment community. I, in my whole years, thought that these units were going to be affordable for 30 years. That was the intent. And I started to do some research around how many 30-year properties are going to come to, and potentially those units are going to be at risk. There's a National Housing Preservation Database. So this is not a new problem. It's been going on for a while. What I didn't realize is that many properties, many affordable housing units are not making it to year 30. We're losing them at year 15. And I was like, what? How is this possible? So it's a big problem nationwide. And in Arizona, we really need to dive deep and better understand how we can preserve those units. There is a qualified contract list. It's published on the Arizona Housing Department website. Right now, there's 9 properties that are interested in getting out of the program. So what the state does is they put the properties out, and if somebody wants to buy them through the program, they market it for a whole year. Then that buyer will have to commit for the last 15 years. But if the buyers don't show up, those properties are for grabs and they're going market. And that's a big shame when the program's intention was to keep those units for 30 years. There's thousands in the nation. Half of our inventory, half of housing affordable units are funded through this program. So we need to figure that one out to preserve, because it's putting more pressure on where people can buy, where people can live, where people can rent. So that is just one small component. The other issue is the market, the way we have allowed many investors to come into different areas, like 30% of homes are owned by investors. That's really limiting the low moderate income buyer to come in and be able to participate in purchasing an affordable home.
Thanks for sharing that important information about LIHTC and some of the issues with the low-income housing tax credit properties no longer being affordable housing after 15 years. And I'd like to point out that there was a couple of links put in the chat thanks to the Arizona Housing Coalition. So if people are interested in learning more, you can go to those links and find out more. But I'd also like to give Ryan and Chris a chance to share their thoughts on what some of the challenges and barriers are to preserving communities right now.
I'll jump in, Chris, and one of the things that I'm sure Chris is going to mention, because I think he has experience in this, is the idea of land trusts. For Rail CDC, once again, and our family of organizations and people, I think we approach it more on the lines of like, back to your idea of the preservation, and how are we actually empowering people to stay in their places through the wealth building. And these loopholes, I think I put it in the chat, some questions, but the systemic nature of the way Arizona dictates how housing can be, how zoning is, what kind of code violations cities are allowed to do, is very prohibitive for a person in a neighborhood to actually be creative and do something. We all saw the ADU, the big ADU battle happening right now. But that benefits people who already own the home, right? And in our current situation, homes are not affordable. So how is that going to help a person in a low moderate income situation to now get out of rentership, or how is it stopping the person who owns that home and lives in California or Gilbert or somewhere else from just renting a slum house to them for a very long time, for multiple generations? In our situation, there's multiple generations of family who've lived in these rental houses that are not kept up well, right? So I think a lot of these loopholes come down to systemic problems in how we dictate housing, right? And Chris, please add on to that sentiment.
Yeah, there's a lot, I mean, I think fundamentally how property taxes are levied is a challenge for people in communities like mine, where homes have been passed down generation to generation. So you have the generation of renters, but also when the home is passed down, if property taxes go up to a point where people can't actually afford to stay in their family home because they can't afford the taxes. And so that's an issue, and something that some places in the country are looking at now is this land value tax concept. And it's like taxing on the unimproved value of the land. So that way it doesn't create a disincentive to make improvements. And then it also removes the incentive for people to sit on a bunch of lots, which can be a problem too, when as far as like challenges to preserving community is if you have a few landowners who are just sitting and holding land and not doing nothing with them. It's just, you have that staleness that takes place. So that's a challenge, in that land use, land value tax is one way to potentially look at that. And I'd be curious if anyone has heard of the land value tax. If you put in the chat, or if you have any thoughts on that, I'd like to to see what people are thinking on that. But some other fundamental ones too would be like, if we don't have water to give or to service a community, the community can't be there, right? So like if like we're contracted with a company that provides our water, we don't provide our own water. We have an active dewatering that's happening in our backyard right now. Arizona aquifers generally, and according to a hydrologist that I spoke with, they generally don't recharge. Most aquifers are about 10,000 years old or more. And so that tells you something about that we're taking from a spending account and we're not putting back into it. And so that's obviously an issue. And then of course there's like this extractive and speculative mindset that drives a lot of the capital investments that occur. And it's a whole paradigmatic shift that needs to happen for us to start seeing housing in a different light than a money-making opportunity. But it's you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it's right there in the foundation of it all.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks everyone for sharing your thoughts. I think this is a great opportunity to talk a little bit more about community land trusts. Speaking of thinking about things in a different light, and also I wanted to just give a chance to dig a little bit more into that topic since Ryan had mentioned it. But I know all three of you have some insight on that. So can we share a little bit more about what community land trusts are and how they could be a solution for preserving communities? Ryan, do you want to go ahead and get us started?
So my experience in community land trusts and working with Newtown, with a COPA developments happening in Tempe, in the city of Tempe, which is, I love that Tempe is aggressively, seeking housing alternatives, and I'm glad that they're kind of pushing a lot of these on the forefront. But the community land trust model, and also the idea of these mobile home parks and how that's become a very big issue in the news and very controversial too, is how are we allowing this idea of the first, your first home, and how are we making that affordable, right? And the community land trust model, everyone here probably has more experience than me in it, but from my standpoint, it looks like it's probably one of the only places where someone can, quote unquote, invest into something to possibly step up over time, right? At this time, because of the unaffordability in Arizona.
In my experience, I'm not an expert in the community land trust space, but it is a tool that does preserve affordability for the long term. So it's a very important tool, and I'm happy that in Arizona it's starting to grow. Newtown was one of the first ones. I know we have one in Tucson. I believe Flagstaff might have one or was working on one. But at the end of the day, whatever, we need comprehensive programs and services. We need comprehensive strategies. But at the end of the day, it's always a math problem, in my opinion. So with a land trust, somebody still needs to pay for that land. And that's where it gets tricky. And it's not for everyone, right? I grew up hearing my dad always saying, this is my tierra, this is my land, this is my home. And the concept of not owning that land underneath you is not for everyone. But it's better than, in my view, it's better than renting and never be able to build some wealth, right? At the end of the day, the goal is to have something and to pass it on. I mean, that's been how this nation was built, with the housing programs. The FHA program was created to help people buy and build wealth. And because white folks took advantage of that program, people of color were excluded from participating in many programs. We have this disparity, and folks are saying, go ahead, people of color, go buy your home, go do this, go build wealth. But the system is so not set up to help us gain in that ground.
Chris, I would invite you to talk because I know you brought some stuff up the other day, but I also think it's kind of the idea of the land, Patricia, and who owns the land, right? And so I think a lot of people on here are from cities, and a lot of cities own a lot of land. Like where I live in Mesa, the city owns a ton of land on the south side of Mesa, and the south side of Mesa is historically the lowest income area, probably one of the lowest income areas, median income in the county, right? And so how does that land, which they generally use to sell to developers, sell to the developer who wants to put people in housing, right? And in an affordable way that's not going to go away in 15 years. So, I mean, I guess the question can be posed, is this a leadership problem in that land exchange? Is it the developers, game of, this is an investment and I want to make money on it, right? And that's how all of us buying single family homes, it's an investment that we want to make money on, right? But how does that actually benefit the community? And how is it an investment in community versus an investment in the land for profit?
Yeah, I'm definitely in agreement there. So taking land out of the speculative market is a way to start to reverse or combat against gentrification. And how land gets into that community land trust, like Patricia alluded to, is always a challenge. There's creative ways to do it. There's planned giving that is bigger in this space, because people want to see that not an abstract concept like my money, but this place that I own is going to be used in some kind of perpetually beneficial way. And so we're in the process right now of getting our community land trust started. And what we've heard from others who have gone down this road before us is that it's really important to have a broad base to help you with the process, because you don't want to only rely on people in a small group of people trying to do something like a community land trust. It's really something you want a wide net for. So that's just some advice that we've received. And so we're looking at how we can have a large enough container to be more of a regional community land trust versus being specific to a smaller community like ours.
Thanks, Chris. And since you are from a smaller community, since you're based in Superior, I'd love to get a little bit more of a picture of what things look like in Superior. What does displacement look like in Superior, and what do you think are some of the unique issues that you see in a more rural part of the state that maybe we don't see as much in urban areas in Arizona?
One issue we have is what do we consider to be affordable? So when an affordable developer came into our town and had some pitch on doing a development, of course, in the background there was the question of, well, how long would these even be affordable for before it transitions to not needing to be affordable, kind of like Patricia was talking about, was an open question that we all had, because you have to ask what's in it for them when these developers come. But when we ask, like, well, what are we talking about price wise? They're like, oh, well, for a 2-bedroom home, $1,200 a month. And where y'all live, that might be affordable, but in Superior, that is not affordable. And to say that here's your affordable housing price of $1,200 for a 2-bedroom is just it's out of context. It's out of touch with what's actually happening in our place. And so that might be unique because of just the income disparities that we have. Here in Superior, we're half the median household income, or 1.5x the poverty rate for the state of Arizona. So we have those pressures where we live. But I think a lot of the other challenges are pretty ubiquitous because it's part of this larger systemic issue that we're facing. But those would be some of the unique things that we're facing, is just the out of context idea of affordability.
That's really helpful to know. Context is key when it comes to working with communities, right? So and speaking of another community, I'd like to also think about what's happening in Mesa and have Ryan talk a little bit about that, because I think Mesa's been one of the communities that has seen so much investment in Arizona, and there's been a ton of development that's happening in downtown Mesa. The light rail has been extended to Mesa. So I would like to know how that's contributed to displacement and how has that impacted families that have lived in Mesa.
Absolutely. And it's just as kind of a piece of context, when we first started working on the light rail extension into Mesa and running a small business technical assistance program along that, the only cranes in the sky probably in 30 years were the 5 affordable housing complexes that had come to the downtown Mesa area, as initiated by Scott Smith originally and supported by a number of groups, including ours at the time. That led to many cranes being in the air now in the downtown Mesa area, like probably the tune of $1.6 billion in the square mile alone, which is a ton of money in one small area. When right next door we have the historically segregated Black neighborhood, which is on University, on the other side of University, and then the historical migrant worker area, which is on the south side of Mesa. And all those houses that used to be $100,000, $150,000, $200,000 are now speculative housing for $300,000, $400,000 a piece. A lot of these places haven't been updated since, some probably since they were built in some cases. I mean, there's places that still look like the original state of how it was built. And the folks in these areas, especially on the south side, where I want to say it was like 78% rental or something like that, they are very scared that, you know, although they've been renting for 3 generations, they soon will be moved out because of that speculation. And as we've been working in these neighborhoods, I think we all have to be very conscious as community organizations that we are also part of the problem. We're not the solution or the savior coming in. And if we're not intentional about this, we will help with the displacement of a lot of these, you know, small businesses and neighborhoods who've been there for a long time. Through our work, thinking it's a great thing, but we have to just think that the tactics we're using is keeping somebody in their place.
Thanks, Ryan. And I know that Rail CDC has done, and Regenerating Sonora and Chicanos por la Causa have all done different neighborhood activities to really engage the community with tackling housing affordability and trying to preserve communities. So are there any sort of activities or tactics that you've seen be really successful, or also lessons learned that you would recommend people not do, so they don't have to learn the lessons the hard way? So any insight you might have?
Patricia, I'll jump in. First of all, for those who are not familiar with Chicanos por la Causa, the organization is 50 plus years old, 55 years old. We were established in 1969 to respond to community injustices, starting with education. The organization has grown. We're now in 5 states, and we focus on housing, health, and education, economic development, education, and advocacy. So very comprehensive. The organization has grown and responded to where the needs have been. And I wanted to touch on a couple of things: incomes, the HUD published incomes, and then lessons learned. And they go together. So as a housing developer, CPLC has been a housing developer from very early on. And you can only do what the government or what the resources are available, right? So CPLC has been very good in learning how to navigate federal, state, local programs. But sometimes these programs have very strict boxes that you can't deviate. So it's working within those parameters and making the best of it. Example, the low-income housing tax credit program that we talked about. Very popular across the nation. It's very prescriptive. The community can only charge up to so much, and it's targeted for low moderate income. They can also mix higher incomes. I had a Wall Street Journal reporter the other day couple weeks ago, he was working on a story and he was like, how can it be that rents went up 36% if this is a LUCTIC deal? Well, it's not the individual's income that gets measured. It's what's published. So if the income in the area is, say, 70,000, then the calculations are 50% of area income, 60%. And that is the calculation used to say this is going to be the rent, allowed rent. The developer owner can always charge less. So it doesn't mean that it's the individual's income, and we try not to burden them by making sure that we don't charge more than 30% of that published income guideline. And I say all of this because public housing, Section 8 housing, those are the ideal. When we're talking about very extreme low-income people, and we don't want to cost burden them, their rents are based on their individual income. And so that's a better tool. Unfortunately, there's not enough of that program. There's not enough invested from the federal government to our municipalities to provide that program. Between Section 8 and public housing, both combined, they make up, about 47% of the housing stock across the nation. But we need more of it. The LIHTC program is a great program, but it's not always affordable to the people that really need it. And to Chris's point, lessons learned. When a developer goes into the community, you go in with your basic parameters and you say, okay, we can charge X amount of rents, and then we can finance because, the money has to come from somewhere. And so it works out this way. But the reality is that the immediate community, they can't pay that $1,200. They can only pay $400. When you do that math, you can't build anything. So it's this balance of having a good mix so that we can help those that very, very much need it, and try to make the best of what's available. We need more flexibility. We need more programs. We really do need more subsidy or a different way of financing these very important communities that need to provide very much needed housing. I hope I made sense.
Yes, it does actually. And from the community side, so Rail CDC over time has really been developing this method of engagement and empowerment. I put it in the chat, but eliminating the outreach, moving past the engagement and going towards the time and the money being in empowerment, and the speed of trust, building communities at the speed of trust, right? So building trust is the first component of that. And so for us, what we do a lot of times is we do, and this is the thing that one of my partners in this work, Augie, kind of helped originate in our work, is to just go to the neighborhood, start doing little events, right? Art-based events, and what we call pláticas. So we go into somebody's neighborhood, we start observing, we meet neighbors, and then we engage that neighbor and say, hey, neighbor, we want you to throw a little plática in your front yard, and where we're just going to talk and we're going to listen. And so, Josefina, to your question that you had posed, like, how do we do more of these things where neighborhoods to be preserved? It's really activating the neighborhood and the community into thinking, how do I do this without outside help if I don't need it, right? And so we move past that plática into walking audits, where you take those neighbors on a walk of their neighborhood, and without being suggestive, we just ask questions like, why do you think this sidewalk ends right here like it does? Why do you think that there's just a pole in the ground for this bus station? Why do you think that there's no trees on this street? Or why is there not irrigated water here like there is 2 streets down? All these questions that might happen just to get somebody thinking. And then over time, and over a number of these pláticas and walking audits and other different art engagements, murals, shade structure building, prototyping, all these little interactions that we do is building trust. So when it comes time to affect policy and we have a training built in there, we can say, hey, neighbors, you're ready now to go talk to the mayor, or we'll have the mayor come here. Why not? We've done that a few times, and they were so surprised that they could actually say to the mayor, this is what we want. And they said, I've never had this opportunity before. And we say, well, why not? I didn't know that I could, you know? We actually have a report that I think they'll probably drop in the chat, and it's just the Southside neighborhood version of what we've done. We do this in all our corridors. It's part of our program in engagement and small and business TA, but we write it all out. So use it to your advantage. It's a win for all of us when the neighborhoods win. So please use it. But I think it really is the speed of trust. And some organizations, and this will be my last point, come in and they've wanted to work with us, and we make them sign an agreement, and it is an equitable engagement agreement. And if they don't do it, they don't sign this, we don't work with them in the neighborhood. And that it consists of everything that you do, everything that you write will not be extractive. You will make sure with the community first that they approve that report. If you're going to survey somebody, is because, you know, a lot of these kind of neighborhoods who've been really affected over time, they've been surveyed to death. Everyone wants to come in and take the survey of the poor people, right? That's kind of the thing, right? And then they go away with that information they've never heard of again. So how do they ever feel empowered if they don't even have their own information, right? So I think part of this is a lot of the empowerment of that neighborhood to not even depend on the government subsidies of this kind of these kind of things. Those are important. I'm not saying that they shouldn't happen. There's just many pieces of this, right? And there's more community members than there are government programs. So we have to remember, how do you empower that community member?
Love all of the examples that you shared, Ryan, and I'll point to the chat because there's a Rail CDC PDF that the Arizona Housing Coalition had put into the chat. And also, just let me plug the chat right now. If you're not paying attention to the robust conversation that's happening there, there are a ton of links and great comments and insights happening in the chat. So thank you all for sharing your thoughts. Thank you, Josefina, for the great question about how can we actually go about preserving the community. So thank you for prompting that really important discussion. Chris, I wanted to make sure that you had an opportunity to share some of the lessons that you might have seen, lessons learned or best practices for working in community.
I'll be brief on to answer the original question. And we're doing an active process right now of trying to see how we can kind of hack some of these services that are available but are locked up. So I think if you're in whatever position you're in, if you're doing some kind of service that you're providing to your various communities, maybe you have this feeling like, gosh, there's so much available here, but no one's taking advantage of it. How come people just don't take it? And usually there's some barriers in place. And so if you're up for doing some ride-alongs with some of the people who are trying to get access to your services to better understand what the day in a life is for them to take advantage of them, your eyes will be open to what the barriers are. And then if you have the kind of team around you that's open to coming up with creative ways to tick the boxes that are necessary to unlock those fundings in an easier way for people. An example is like if there's maybe there's some assistance that can be given, but first someone needs to take a financial literacy course. And if you don't take the financial literacy course, then you don't get access to the thing. Well, if people don't have access to the internet and they don't have computers at their homes, then how are they going to take the financial literacy? So like, could you work with a nonprofit who has a community center that can do for a month every week, do like either a lunch and learn or an evening time where that financial literacy course is given. There's food there. It's a little bit of a party, but you get a bunch of people to take advantage of ticking that box that's required. So that way they can then get these services that are available. I only use that as an example to say we have to think creatively about how we can unlock these services if they're there.
I love all of these really concrete examples of work that you all have done in communities, and I hope that's helpful to our audience as well. And I just wanted to say thanks to the audience for contributing great questions. I wanted to go back to a question that Jessica had asked a while back about exploring rent caps or how laws on how much a rent can be raised, because I think that brings up an important question, not just about rent control in Arizona and the possibility there, but what kind of policies and programs need to be changed or created or expanded to allow people to stay in their communities. If you could each wave a magic wand and change a policy, what would you change? And if it's more than one, that's okay. We'll let it slide. Patricia, go for it.
I'll jump in first. So to mind, there's like three that come up to my mind right away. Inclusionary zoning, meaning there's a fair balance for every affordable, for every non-affordable, we will have some affordable. So be intentional about it so that we can always have that balance. The low-income housing tax credit, it's my favorite topic for the day. We could design it where homeownership could be part of it at the end of that 15-year mark. And there are some groups that have done that, like Travis. They have a community that they put in. And in the past, that's something that we need to advocate more so that at least we have ownership inventory for people to buy if they qualify. And then the Section 8 program. Section 8 has a homeownership component. Instead of making the rent payment, it could go to the mortgage payment. There's barriers with it, and that's a policy that I'd love to see change. And I'll leave you with that.
Okay, mine's a bit of a pipe dream, and it's that there would be public initiatives where there's housing development that's done where it's not about a money on money return, that it's a public good and a public service to do a housing development that will incorporate some of the elements that Patricia mentioned about mixed use and mixed affordability, and that could be done in a way that the expectation isn't about making more money, but to Mr. Duarte's point earlier that he mentioned on here, that the return is more about the social and cultural and human capital that's developed in the process.
For me, I think it's more of a, I guess, just an idea change in general for like the idea of policy making. But, and this is something, there's two kind of pieces of this. One is that, how are you going to judge your success in something that we're doing, or something that the communities, that the city he wants to do or whatever. And that idea of the city investing in the people versus like the property. So I'm going to say something that once again, my partner Augie always says, and he often says that if the city would just put even a portion of the amount of money that we all want to invest in land and redevelopment and all that stuff into the actual people that live there, I think we would see some greater results in a lot of the ideas of community development, right? So it's wealth building, even small incremental development done by people in the neighborhood. And this has been happening all over in the East Coast forever, and that's why there's a lot of different housing options and stuff there. But secondly, when we look over time and we look at a low to moderate income census tract neighborhood, and we say, okay, the idea of this income is at this level right now, but in 10 years we look at it and the income has gone up, but the demographics have changed, then we've done a huge disservice to that area, and we have not preserved the neighborhood or its character in any way. But if the demographics have stayed the same, then we did a really good job of keeping that neighborhood and that type of people who live there and celebrating their culture and developing in their housing, right? And so I think for me, more it's like, how are we investing more in the people to really be empowered to do what's best from that lived experience, versus saying, I'm going to redo this whole road and take out 4 of these restaurants for some new parking structures, and we're going to allow affordable housing right there if we can find the right developer. And that kind of stuff is very government down, and I think it's proven that it's worked only limited at this point.
I love that phrase that you just used, Ryan, about investing in people. And heads up, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question on that. What would that look like to you in your ideal world, if you could just, say, this is what that looks like, and I I want to see us do X, Y, and Z, what would those things be? What does that look like to you?
I'll give one example of an experience that we've had, right? And so during the light rail expansion into Mesa, Scott Smith at the time was the mayor, and Terry Benelli was leading NEDCO at the time. And so this is where Augie, myself, and a bunch of the people who did community development in that area started, right? And so what they did is they decided we're going to put a certain amount of money into a small business development program over time that will allow us to keep those small businesses here through light rail construction, which lasted a number of years. That investment in those businesses and those people, still to this day, if you come to downtown Mesa, the small businesses there are very tight. They're very close. We have a huge array of businesses that are not chains, because we all decided at that time that we're like, yeah, the Postinos and all that stuff is great, but do we want another Postinos in another downtown? No, we want our own version of that. We want our Mesa version of that, right? And so investments like that, investments in a down payment program, investments in the branding and the cultural relevancy of an area. And this is neighborhood by neighborhood. This is not like a, hey, we're going to just do an overlay of the whole city and we're going to, say this is the plan, right? So I think cities need to take and organizations and nonprofits and all the different organizations take that time to invest in the place and allow the people there to really dictate what happens. The people in those areas have a right, not only the right, but the responsibility of taking the responsibility that their neighborhood under their control. And if the government's always coming in and saying, well, we're going to say that this is a zoning code violation for you and this is that, it's hard to do that because it's detracting from like what their confidence is on that, So I think programs that empower people would be my answer to that. And that can be a lot of things. So it's hard to say what that exactly is.
Well, you gave one great example, and I appreciate that. And I wanted to go back to the question that you'd answered, but Josefina, and hi, Josefina, glad you're here, had asked earlier when Patricia had said that let the community say how their own neighborhood needs to be preserved, which is very much in line with what you're talking about, Ryan. Josefina had wanted to know how Patricia saw that being able to happen. So what do you say, Patricia?
In regards to let the neighborhood decide what
Yes.
they want to do, definitely empowering residents to voice the direction of their community, especially as things change or about to change. It's important to get their feedback. And so I agree 100%. And as far as investing in people, it has to be very holistic, from the children that we have in our homes, making sure that they're getting quality education, because at the end of the day, it's the choice. It's the choice that people want to make. We want to be in a place where if people want to stay in their community, they will be able to stay. But if they want to move on, they will have the capacity to do so. That's the key, that we all should be able to have those choices of what we want to be. But it is, at the end of the day, I mean, somebody not too long ago shared, well, just more people have to make more money so that they can afford to buy. Really? Yes. So it's all holistic. At the end of the day, it's all about what people want to do, making sure that they have a voice and their voices are heard. That civic engagement is very, very important. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, I want to add on to that too. And I think some of this work, and I mean, you'll see people like Lisk, Phoenix doing this, and we work with David quite a bit on this, is the investment in a program should not be a 1-year thing, right? This should almost be a 10-year plan. And so when you're a funder and your idea of funding a program or a small business, a legacy business, one-on-one TA program over time, or small sub-granting thing, and you're doing it for 1 year, you're almost just doing it for a pat on the back for, and a box check for your industry. And I'm probably going to get beat up for this by funders later, but I don't really care. I'm on one of those days. But either way, it should be like a 10-year plan for some of these areas that these businesses have been around just fine, for 10 years, like the Latino district that we work in. I have a landowner friend, and he's like, Latino businesses are recession proof because they were already operating cash and paying their rent consistently for a long time, right? But then you have someone like the city that comes in and decides they want to do a sign change for the whole entire area, and then they code violate everybody on the entire street, and then that creates the big problem of displacing all those Latino businesses that have been working in there for probably 20 years, right? So I think a lot of this is just if it's a city, they need to understand their place and their role in that thing. If it's a community organization, we need to understand our role in this. Our one-on-one TA services are led by the small businesses. We have worked with some legacy businesses in the Apache corridor that were about to go under, and these are places I've been eating at for 20 years, and we helped them through one-on-one business TA. We didn't ask questions, and we did it for free based upon funding we got from people like Lisk Phoenix, right? And that allowed them to stay in business through the pandemic and helping people get the PPP, that kind of stuff. So I think these programs can be invested in, but not in the short term. So if any of you are funders out there, don't get mad at me, just invest for longer.
Great points, Ryan.
And really important. Definitely. Money makes things work.
And it sounds like not just money, but money directed to community-based organizations that really understand their community and have trust with local businesses and neighbors. And Chris, I love your point in the chat here that one-to-one business technical assistance is key. I wanted to go back to something. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I actually just saw some questions in the Q&A. I didn't realize there was 2 actual spots for people typing stuff in. And Greg, I don't know if this was for me, but the wanting all the areas to be quote unquote gentrified. That's one of those weird things, right? Because when you talk about redevelopment in an area or community development and comprehensive community development, you want people to build wealth for themselves over time, right? But at the same time, you want to be very intentional so they keep the wealth and they keep their neighborhood. So I think the answer to that is not necessarily that I want everything to be gentrified, but it is something that is a concern because we as organizations are gentrifying areas through our work, right? And Michelle, the South Phoenix conversation, I did about a year and a half in South Phoenix during before prepping for light rail. I think the city of Phoenix put $500,000 into a program over there. But in my personal experience, the politics of South Phoenix are so crazy that it's very difficult to do work in the area when so many players are being very heavy-handed in the area. I remember walking into the businesses in South Phoenix, and there's like what is it, like 2 lanes or no train thing was going on, and people were going insane about all kinds of things. No one knew what was going on. There wasn't a good delivery system for communication. So I think it's as a community development person that's been very street level for a long time, I think that's a very complicated question, and there's a lot of answers to it. Sorry for not having a good one.
Thanks for sharing your experience there, Ryan, and your insight. I wanted to go back to something that Chris had mentioned in the chat earlier. Chris, you had made the comment that you can't neglect the social structure while we're focusing on the infrastructure. And I think that's so thoughtful. And I would like to hear what your thoughts are on like what kind of investments or prioritization of the social structure you think we need to be doing as we think about community investment and community development.
Those wraparound services are so key. If we're doing affordable housing and we don't hold in mind the other support systems that are necessary for people to have a thriving life, then we're falling short in my view. If we can, Serena, could you pull up that framework? I wanted to share this, especially because of all the folks that I noticed that are on the chat here from some kind of municipality. I think you might be interested in this framework, and this is the vital conditions for health framework. So the story goes that during and after the pandemic, the federal government said we need to figure out how we're going to recover from all of the issues that we faced and the disruption that we've had. What are we going to do to be able to get people on the same page, to be able to have a shared mental model, and use that as a way to start flowing resources through in a good and comprehensive way. And what they came up with is this vital conditions for health framework. It's like social determinants of health taken to its next level, because there's a lot of reasons that there becomes some almost like competitiveness that can happen with the way that framework was structured, whereas this one can get people on the same page very quickly. So specific to humane housing, what they talk about here is an adequate space for every person, affordable costs, close to work, schools, food, recreation, nature, a diverse neighborhood without gentrification, segregation, or concentrated poverty, and of course, safe structures. So that's when we look at housing just as one component of many that we need to look at. And the whole federal government is getting on board with this framework, and it would be a way that we could all start to have a shared mental model that we can use to speak a similar language, not just within our own grassroots work, but within the level of the municipalities all the way to the federal government. So I think it's a good opportunity for us to look at something that we all have a shared image of something, and the idea here is for all people to be thriving, no exception, then there's a possibility here that we could make things a little bit easier on ourselves. So thanks for letting me share that.
Right
Thank you
on,
for
Chris.
sharing that.
I remember the Vitalist Health Wheel came out, and I was back in a while ago, and I was like, oh, that's a great framework also on how people were looking at housing, walkability, all the different things. Back to your point, Chris, of the wraparound services really being kind of key.
The fact that over 40 federal agencies were able to get on board with this is pretty shocking, and the fact that I can go to one of our high school students who's involved in the work that we're doing, I throw up the framework and I say, okay, let's just plot the stuff that we're doing onto this, and it's just so natural and easy because it gets away from some of the more abstract language.
Thanks, Chris. And while we're on the topic, do you want to talk a little bit more? We've talked a little bit about the work that's happening in Superior, but do you want to share more about what Regenerating Sonora's vision is and some of the work that you're doing? Because I think it's incredibly cool, and every time you talk about it, I'm really excited to hear about the work that you're doing in community, because I think that is really what preserving community is all about.
Yeah, thank you. Well, you notice in that framework that right in the center of it all is belonging and civic muscle, and that's really the core of us being able to really do anything meaningful in a good way. So we talk about we're doing this work with our community, not to or for, and that implies a lot. You know, it's one thing that is a little bit different about the work that we're doing is that when we pay people for their time. Even though we're a nonprofit, we're doing community work, we're trying to normalize this radical idea that people can have a viable career path helping their own neighborhood. Right now, that's not really the case, but we're trying to normalize that by demonstrating it with the people that we work with. I think it's one of the reasons we have so many challenges today is that people are trying to do this with the few hours of personal time that they have, and that has all kinds of challenges, burnout, financial pressures, and what have you. In our community here, like we have a number of programs. I'll just give the community garden as an example. We have a community garden where we come and we work together, and sometimes I'll ask someone, hey, do you want to come help out at the garden? And they say, oh, well, I gotta go Uber and maybe do some door dashing in Phoenix on Saturday, so I can't come. Like, well, you're a science teacher, like you have so much wealth and experience, you care about your community. It's kind of like, well, yeah, I am a science teacher, I don't get paid a lot and I need to pay my bills, you know. So if we can find ways for people to not have these desires to be antithetical to each other, like helping my community and paying my bills and supporting my family. If those could be part of the same road, then I think we're going to be in a much better spot long term. As far as the work that we're doing, we have a community center, which is like a community hub for people to get together to make their neighborhood a better place. We have like a youth tech club there. We have multiple youth programs, a lot going on there. We have our entrepreneurship support doing one-on-one TA, like Ryan mentioned. We have regional collaborative work that we're doing, where folks in the Copper Corridor from other communities are coming together, and we're trying to see how can we be stewards of the whole, not just like, yes, we have our own organizations that we're working with and for, but if we just put those organizational hats off for a moment and think about this region as a whole, how might we work together to make this a thriving place? So that's just a touch of some of the work that we're doing. It sounds like it's in a bunch of directions, but it's all centered towards the place, right? Because we're a place-based organization. So it's about ensuring that our place is thriving.
It doesn't sound to me like it's in a bunch of different directions. It sounds holistic, like you're thoughtful about all of the different aspects of community and what people in Superior in the Copper Corridor need. So thanks for sharing the examples from Regenerating Sonora. And we'll be sure to include a link to the Regenerating Sonora website, along with links to resources from everything else that we've discussed. I also just wanted to highlight that when you talked about how people in Superior have to go work for DoorDash on the weekends, that's also a sort of community displacement. There aren't jobs or good enough paying jobs in the community, so people have to leave the community and can't get involved in community activities on the weekend because they have to be somewhere else, since there's a lack of jobs that pay a livable wage available. So I think that's just, one more aspect of displacement, just in a different way. We've had a couple of comments and questions come in on LIHTC. So Patricia, I'd like to have you, if you can, answer the LIHTC questions about if there's anything happening with LIHTC in Northern Arizona, or stopping the sale of housing if you're not going to be living in it. And then maybe there's just a place that you might refer people to if they have LIHTC questions that they can dig in a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm not going to be liked by the Department of Housing after this call, but it's important, right? It's community knowing what's happening. So in Flagstaff, there's 2 properties on the list. It's public information. I'm not making anything up. 2 properties, Flagstaff Affordable Housing and Oakwood Village. I don't know how many units in each, but they both received tax credits, one in 96 and the other one in 1998. So they're close to that 30-year mark, 27 years and 25 years. Why they decided to sell now and not wait the 30 years is a really great question for them. But my thought is the market is so hot that they're making a lot of money selling these. So the key is, what's it gonna take to keep them? Can you find a buyer to buy these 2 communities and commit to preserving them affordable for another 30 years? I know it's possible. I have an organization in Utah that they had a senior development and it went for sale, but they negotiated with a developer and they were able to make money as a nonprofit to invest back in their mission. But the developer made a commitment for a 99-year to keep the property affordable, and it was for seniors. So it's a matter of understanding what's happening, trying to negotiate, talk to the city, talk to the state, figure out what's it going to take. I still haven't understood. I need to understand what's the financing that we're missing to keep that affordability. Yes, they can re-syndicate and redo it all over again. And that's up to the developer to do so. It takes money. And then those wraparound services that are very important, we need to make sure that operating those communities is still going to be possible and keep them affordable. There's so many economic factors that determine that. Insurance costs, guys. Insurance is ridiculous. Maybe developers, owners don't want to increase rents, but if they're going to operate a successful multifamily development, they have to recoup the cost. Insurance is very high, and you know the story goes on. So it's the inflation that is hurting overall. So in my view, the solution is subsidy. Something has to help it, balance it, and keep it affordable. So the question was what to do, where do you get more information? Is I would start calling the Department of Housing, call that community, find out, can the community meet with the owner and strategize, figure out what's it gonna take to make sure that they stay affordable. And you know, Flagstaff, you have 2 properties here. It's very, very important not to lose anything. You need more. You need more housing. There's a lot of properties in rural Arizona. There's only one in Glendale. I'm looking at the published list from the website, and you just Google qualified contracts in the Department of Housing, and hopefully we can drop that chat in the that link into the chat. I'm not tracking all the questions, so Serena, help me. Was that the question?
Yes, you did a great job answering it. Thank you. I think that's a ton of great information about LIHTC and how to track the affordable housing communities or affordable housing properties in your community. And we'll try to find that link and send it out along with the other resources. So we're almost at time, but I want to give each of our panelists a chance to share their final thoughts. Anything else that you think is important for the audience to know walking away from this morning's conversation? So you each get about a minute or so to wrap up and give your final thoughts. Patricia, since you're off mute, why don't you start?
It's important to have this dialogue, have this conversation, pay attention to what's happening, policy, understand all the different resources. I mean, it's not easy. And this work has only gotten harder in my experience. We need more people involved from all sectors to really understand housing should be a right. We should not be a nation or areas with so many people on the streets or at the risk of becoming homeless, because evictions are really high, and eviction really destroys people's credit, and then nobody wants to rent to them. So there's some very serious things in our communities that we need to better understand, educate, and then let's widen the group of people that understand the issues, and let's take them on. Unidos podemos. So united we can.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your passion during this webinar too. It's really inspiring. Ryan, final thoughts.
Gosh, there's so many final thoughts, right? I think that if all of us here, and looks like there's 74 people that are related to organizations on this call, kind of really just look at yourself and think about, we look at the community and what you're seeing right now because of pandemic, because all these things that are happening, and you watch the need grow, right? So it is only responsible for all of us to think about, how do you serve more people, right? And how do you help them to get into these houses? And how do you help them with community health? How do you empower them to act beyond the swipe of the pen of our organizations or government, right? And so the reason why I say that is because, coming from a place where I've been in a government, situation, or, on city council, and also being in an organization, we can't always be the heroes, and really the heroes of the people in the neighborhood doing what they do. And so we just need to prepare people to be better for themselves and to understand how to be more resilient in their neighborhood. That's why this idea of resilience is becoming so popular across the nation, because neighborhood resilience is probably where the future will be in a lot of these kind of talks, right? And how to be resilient for yourself.
Thanks, Ryan. And Chris, wrap it up for us, please.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I gotta second everything that both Patricia and Ryan have said here for sure. And just to add some more into it, let's remember the unintended consequences that we can have when we're trying to uplift our community, that it can literally raise the value of that place. And that means it could be a problem for people who have lived there for quite some time. So we have to keep that in mind. And that means that we can't take a fragmented view. If we think we're just going to focus on this little issue here, and this is the thing that we're going to focus on, and not seeing the ripple effects that occur, then we're missing the picture here. And so that fragmentation even means in any kind of development that's happening, you have to keep in mind that this home or this development is nested in a neighborhood. It's nested in a larger watershed. It's nested in a greater context that we have to keep in mind if we're going to do this well. Otherwise, we're just sticking something in a place and just crossing our fingers that it's going to go okay. So if you know of developers who are taking the right kind of perspective, that are operating in good faith and really are doing things in a way that is supportive of the community for the short term and the long term especially, then let's lift those folks up, because we're going to need more developers that are coming at this from the right place, and also those partnerships with other nonprofits and municipalities who are doing things in a way that's just outside of the conventions. It's going to require creativity with how we zone, how we think about housing to begin with, and the solutions that we have. Some of them are not going to be ever have existed before. So I think we have to be creative, and it's necessary for us to ensure that our people have places to live as a fundamental right, like Patricia had mentioned. So thank you.
Big thanks to the three of you for being here today and sharing your insight. The stories from Chicanos por la Causa, Rail CDC, and Regenerating Sonora are just so inspiring. And the three of you have so much passion and care for your communities. And I know that comes through on the camera. And I just wanted to thank you all for generously sharing your time and wisdom. And I wanted to thank the audience too, because the comments today and the questions have been really thoughtful. I love the depth of conversation that has been happening. And these conversations aren't as robust or as meaningful without the audience participating. So thank you all for sharing your thoughts. On behalf of the Arizona Partnership for Healthy Communities, LISC Phoenix, and the Arizona Housing Coalition, thank you all for being here today. And we'll be sure to send out a follow-up email with all of the links and contact information for our speakers. And thank you. Have a great day.